Let me tell you about the day I won everything, and then let you watch them take it. The morning the Han River project results were announced, I was already in the office at 5 a.m. That was not unusual. That was Tuesday. That was every day for the past 14 months, the length of time I had spent bleeding myself dry over 2,400 square meters of structural vision that no one in that building believed a black woman from Atlanta could actually deliver. I had the coffee rings on my drafting table to prove it. I had the unanswered emails, the meetings I wasn't invited to, the presentations where my slides appeared under someone else's name. I had all of it cataloged, dated, saved in triplicate on a personal server that Director Kang did not know existed. I had learned early, in this city, in this industry, documentation is survival. The announcement came through official government channels at 7:47 a.m. Han River Pedestrian Bridge and Cultural Corridor. Phase 1 design contract, value $100 million, awarded to KangStar Architecture Group. Lead concept by Amara Solis. My name, right there, in the official record. I read it 4 times on my phone screen in the empty women's restroom on the 31st floor, and then I sat on the edge of the sink and let myself feel it for exactly 60 seconds, the fullness of it, the realness of it. 3 years of performing calm while everything inside me ran at full velocity, and then I washed my face, reapplied my lipstick, and walked back to my desk. Because that was the other thing I had learned. Never let them see the moment before the armor goes back on. By 9 a.m., the office knew. By 9:15, people were stopping by my desk, junior architects, mid-level designers, the administrative staff who had always been kinder to me than the architects ever were. Congratulations in Korean, in English, in the careful bilingual code switching that characterized every interaction in this building. Sunbae Park passed my desk without stopping. Sunbae Choi sent an email that said well done with a period at the end, which in Korean corporate culture is the punctuation of a man swallowing something bitter. Director Kang sent nothing at all. He called me into his office at 11 a.m. And by 11:23, my access badge was already dead. If you have ever worked somewhere that needed you but didn't want you, stay with me. Because what happens next is for every single one of us. I need you to understand what 14 months actually looked like before I tell you what happened in that room. Because the win didn't come from talent alone. Talent is the beginning. Talent without endurance is just potential they can bury, and this industry has very deep soil. I need you to understand the 3 phone calls first. 8 months before the Han River results, I was sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from KangStar when my phone buzzed with a calendar invite from someone I didn't recognize. Day 1 Design Partners. Senior Partner. Informal coffee, no agenda. I accepted because in this city, refusing a meeting with a senior partner at a rival firm is its own kind of message, and I wasn't ready to send it yet. He shook my hand too firmly. Spent 45 minutes telling me how valued I would be at a firm that truly understood global perspectives. What he meant, translated through the corporate pleasantries and the second Americano he ordered without asking if I wanted one. We know you're doing the real work over there. Come work for us. Bring what you know. Not just me. What I knew. What I had built. I thanked him warmly, said I was committed to my current project, and smiled the smile I had developed specifically for rooms like that one. The smile that gives nothing away. I left. I documented the meeting date and his name in my personal file. I did not yet know why. I just knew that I should. 2 months after that, a direct message arrived through a mutual contact. Myri Architecture. Smaller firm, hungrier energy, less patience for subtlety. They mentioned the Han River bid specifically, which told me the industry could feel, even from the outside, that something significant was being built inside KangStar's international division. They asked if I could share preliminary insights on the firm's approach as part of an informal consultation. I read that message 3 times, felt the exact shape of what it was, deleted it, screenshotted it first, because there would come a day when the record of who approached me and why and what they asked for would matter enormously. I didn't know the day yet. I was simply keeping the receipts. The third approach was different. Shin Group, not Jae-won directly, never directly, not then. A recruitment consultancy that everyone in the industry recognized as Shin Group's talent pipeline. A phone call, professional and clean, almost respectful in a way the others hadn't been. They were not asking me to share anything. They were asking if I was open. Open to conversations. Open to possibilities. I told them I was not currently available, and I ended the call in under 3 minutes. I filed the number. I noted the date. And I went back to my blueprints, because the Han River project was entering its most critical structural phase, and I had a cantilever system to finalize that was going to change what pedestrian bridges in this city looked like for the next 50 years. 3 firms. All circling. All sensing the same thing, that the work coming out of KangStar's international division was mine, that the credit architecture was structurally unsound, and that I was, in the language of corporate predators, an asset about to become available. They just didn't know I had been waiting to become available on my own terms. And here is the question I know you're asking. If I knew, if I had sensed it for 8 months, if the calls were coming, if the signs were everywhere, why did I stay? I stayed because you don't burn a bridge while you're still standing on it. You wait until you're on the other side. And you make absolutely certain you're holding the matches. The Han River project had begun as a government brief, a public-private partnership to redesign a 2.4-kilometer stretch of riverfront. Signature pedestrian bridge. Cultural corridor with embedded community spaces. A series of micro-architectural interventions along the embankment that would make this stretch of river feel, for the first time, like it belonged to the people living beside it and not just the skyline above it. The kind of project that defined careers. The kind that put names on buildings and buildings in textbooks. Director Kang assigned me as lead designer 6 weeks in. I understood what that meant. I was his instrument. He had recruited me from London 3 years earlier precisely because I had the vision he needed, Seoul's structural language, Atlanta's spatial instincts, an understanding of how waterfront communities breathe that he couldn't manufacture in any of his Korean-educated senior architects regardless of their credentials. He knew it. That was why he introduced me at every Hosik dinner as our international talent, our Amara, always the possessive. Always landing just soft enough that you couldn't call it what it was in a room full of people who would simply nod and pour more drinks and look at me like an interesting acquisition. I attended every one of those dinners. I poured when it was expected of me. I laughed at the jokes. I spoke Korean well enough to understand everything said about me in the third person across the table, and I said nothing about that either. I studied every face. I was building something that had nothing to do with the blueprints on my desk. And into every single one of those blueprints, from the very first file I submitted to the KangStar server, I placed a ghost. A watermark, embedded at the pixel layer, invisible to the human eye, invisible to standard software review, undetectable without a proprietary extraction key that existed solely on my personal server. Not because I knew this moment was coming, but because I had been a Black woman in non-Black spaces long enough to understand one architectural truth above all others. The most important structures are the ones no one can see. The ones that hold everything up quietly, without credit, until the day the building needs to prove it was built right. The ghost in the code. My signature. Sitting in every file Kang thought he owned, patient as foundation concrete, waiting. His office smelled like cedar and ambition. His ambition, specifically the kind that needed other people's oxygen to stay lit. I had worked inside that smell for 3 years. Learned to move through it, perform inside it, produce inside it. And now I was inside it for the last time, though I didn't know that yet, though my body perhaps already did because my back was straighter than usual and my hands were very still at my sides. 3 senior architects were arranged around the room. Sunbae Park. Sunbae Choi. The man whose name I had never been formally given because formal introductions, I had learned, were a form of respect allocated carefully in this building, and I had reached the end of my allocation. None of them looked at me when I walked in. That told me everything about what had been decided before I sat down. Kang stood at the window, the Han River spreading out below him like a reward he was already measuring in his own name. He turned slowly, gave me the smile, the one I had spent 3 years mistaking for warmth, and now could read with perfect clarity for what it was, performance. He told me that my cultural perspective had been an invaluable contribution to the Han River bid, that my unique lens had colored the project beautifully, that KangStar was grateful. Past tense. Every word of it, past tense. Cultural perspective. Unique lens. The vocabulary of erasure dressed in compliments. I had heard variations of it my entire career, in London, in New York, in rooms that smelled like different ambitions, but made the same calculations. But there was something about hearing it in Korean, in this specific arrangement of bodies, that made it land with an architectural weight I hadn't anticipated. This was not carelessness. This was not even cruelty, exactly. This was a structure he had built deliberately, load-bearing point by load-bearing point, long before this morning. He slid the termination document across the desk. Efficient. Untroubled. I was a line item being closed. I picked it up, folded it once, stood, and I told him, very quietly, that I appreciated the clarity. Sunbae Park shifted. Sunbae Choi looked at the floor. The unnamed man studied his own hands. I walked out. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She folded that document once and she walked out. Because the most dangerous woman in the room is always the one who already knows what comes next. Stay with me. The security officer met me in the corridor with a box. My cactus. My reference books. The photograph of my mother in front of the community center I designed for her neighborhood in Atlanta, the first structure I ever watched rise from my own hands. He had packed everything carefully. He apologized with his eyes. I thanked him with mine, because that was all the tenderness either of us had room for in that corridor. He pressed a sealed envelope into my hand before the elevator came. No name on the outside. Someone had given it to him to give to me, and the giving of it made him visibly uncomfortable, which meant whoever sent it understood exactly what it contained. I waited until I was in the marble atrium of the ground floor, standing under 41 meters of custom structural glass that I had specified myself for this building's renovation, because I believed in letting the city in before I opened it. One photograph. My blueprint. My Han River concept, the pedestrian cantilever system I had drawn at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday after 2 years of studying the river's tidal behavior, printed in high resolution with a red stamp across its face. Internal asset. He had already filed it. Before the ceremony. Before my badge failed. Before he shook my hand in the corridor this morning and said we did it with that careful we doing all the heavy lifting. This had not been reactive. This had been prepared and waiting, a termination sequence designed before I even submitted the final bid, because he had always known that if I won, he would need to move quickly. He had simply been more certain of my success than I had allowed myself to be. My work was already in a cage with his name on the lock. But the ghost was still inside it. And he didn't know the ghost existed. And he didn't have the key. And I had 14 days. Not 14 days to win a court case. I want to be clear about that because I had no illusions about Korean IP litigation timelines. Court dates take months. Injunctions take weeks at minimum. I did not need a verdict in 14 days. I needed a scandal. I needed the ghost to appear on the giant ceremonial screens at the groundbreaking, in front of the government officials Kang had cultivated for years, in front of the press, in front of every architect in Seoul who had ever watched me be introduced as our Amara. I needed my authorship extracted and verified and publicly undeniable before a single shovel of ceremonial dirt was turned. Because in this industry, in this city, public shame moves faster than any court order. And a man like Kang, whose entire architecture of power was built on reputation, could survive a legal challenge. He could not survive being exposed as a thief on live television. I picked up my box. I looked north across the river. And I turned toward the Shin Group tower. The message I sent through Shin Group's executive portal took me 4 minutes to write, not because I didn't know what to say, but because every word needed to be load-bearing. I have forensic proof that Director Kang's Han River submission is built on stolen intellectual property. I have 14 days before it becomes permanent. I believe this information is worth 12 minutes of Chairman Shin's time. 47 minutes later, his assistant called. For a clock. 12 minutes. I accepted before she finished the sentence. I went home. Changed into the charcoal suit, structured shoulders, no ornamentation, the suit that said I am not here to be charming, I am here to be correct. Transferred everything onto a single matte black USB drive. The watermark extraction sequences. The original timestamped metadata. The hand-drawn sketches dated 8 months before KangStar issued the Han River brief. 12 documents, each one a brick in a wall that was about to land on Director Kang's carefully constructed legacy. The Shin Group lobby did not welcome. It assessed. Raw concrete columns, a reception desk cut from a single slab of black granite, not printed, cut, like a scar the building wore intentionally. One of the security personnel materialized at my left before I reached the desk and told me the chairman's elevator was this way. Separate. Private. The ride-up was silent and fast, and I used every second of it to become completely still inside. I was not walking into an interview. I was walking into the most important negotiation of my career. And I had the leverage. I needed my face to know that before the doors opened. Jae-won's office faced both the Han River and the KangStar Tower simultaneously. I registered this before I registered him. The placement was a declaration only another architect would read instantly. He kept his rivals in his sight line. He believed in no blind spots. Then I noticed him. Younger than I expected. 42, perhaps 43, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent years learning to make other people fill the silence, while he simply listened and measured. He sat at a long conference table, not a desk, a deliberate choice, because a desk creates hierarchy and a table creates the performance of equality, and I appreciated that he understood the distinction. His suit was the color of deep water. He had a face that had probably been handsome carelessly for years and had recently become something more deliberate, the kind of face that had been tested and had decided, quietly, to become harder. He looked at me the way architects look at a structural problem. Not unkindly. Analytically. Searching for the load-bearing points. He told me I had 12 minutes and gestured to the chair across from him. I did not sit immediately. I set my portfolio on the table, opened it, and placed 3 documents in front of him before I took my seat. His eyes moved to the documents. Then to me. Something in his expression recalibrated, not surprise, but the shift of a man who had expected to be mildly interested and found himself completely intrigued. Which is a different thing entirely. I did not give him a technical explanation. I had prepared one and I discarded it in the elevator because this man did not need to understand the mechanics of what I had built. He needed to understand what it meant. So I told him simply, every blueprint I had ever submitted to KangStar carried a ghost signature. Invisible. Embedded so deep in the file structure that standard review software passed over it without a flicker. It was mine. It could only be extracted with a key that existed on my personal server and nowhere else, and it was sitting inside the stolen Han River blueprints right now, quiet, patient, and legally irrefutable. Like a name carved into the foundation of a building someone else was trying to put their plaque on. The ghost in the code, I told him. My signature. He can't see it. He certainly can't delete it. Jae-won set down the document he had been holding. The city light moved across the table between us. I watched him process, not the information. He had absorbed that already, but the implications, the angles, the specific geometry of what I was offering. A man like him didn't just see what was in front of him. He mapped the entire load-bearing structure of a situation in the time it took most people to read the first line. Then he looked at my hands. I had been gripping my pen without realizing it, not tightly, just held, the way I hold things when I am keeping myself from moving too fast, from saying too much, from letting the urgency leak through the surface of the performance. He noticed it. And unlike the first time, when the noticing had been subtle, a brief downward glance he recovered from quickly, this time he didn't let it pass. He said it quietly, almost conversationally, as though we were already past the formality of strangers, that my hands were steady, Ms. Solis, but my pen was about to snap. He told me to relax, that I had already won the room. I looked at him for a moment directly, without flinching, which I suspected was not what most people did when Shin Jae-won spoke to them in that register. I set the pen down. Not because he told me to, because I chose to. And I told him that I appreciated the observation and that my hands were always steadiest right before I built something that lasted. Something moved behind his eyes. Quick and unguarded, there and gone, like light through a shutter. He looked back at the documents. But the temperature in the room had changed. We both knew it. Neither of us acknowledged it. We were professionals. We had business to conduct. 3 hours later, we were still at that table. His legal team drafted the initial alliance agreement in 40 minutes, efficient in a way that told me Shin Group had been building toward a move against Kang for longer than this afternoon. That this moment had been a door they were waiting for someone to walk through with the right key. I read every clause. I flagged 8. I returned the document with annotations that his own counsel would later describe, in a tone balanced between irritation and admiration, as precise to the point of discomfort. The final contract bound us strategically, his resources, my proof, my design, without assigning him any authorship rights, any IP transfer, any claim to the work I would produce under this alliance. Not employment. A partnership of specific, bounded, legally immovable terms. The distinction was careful, intentional, and absolute, and it was the distinction he had not expected me to fight for with such surgical clarity. He read my revisions in silence. Then again, he picked up his pen, the old-fashioned kind, the kind that costs more than some people's monthly rent, the kind a man keeps as a reminder to himself that he has arrived somewhere permanent, and he signed. I signed beneath him. Amara Solis, architect. As the ink settled on the page, he said it almost to himself, quietly, the way people speak when they are placing a note in their own private record, that Kang had always underestimated the people he collected. I held his gaze. 1 beat longer than was professionally necessary. Long enough to make sure what I said next landed without any softness around the edges. I told him that I was aware. and that he should take significant care not to make the same mistake. He capped his pen. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, which was, I was already understanding the most honest thing about him. And for just 1 second, behind the strategy and the stillness and the deep water composure, I saw it clearly. He didn't just want my blueprints. He wanted the architect who could outsmart a shark like Kang. He thought he had found a weapon. A precise, elegant, self-loading weapon he could aim at a decade-long rival and finally, cleanly, end the war. He hadn't realized yet that a weapon doesn't care who pulls the trigger. And it certainly doesn't stay in the holster once it knows its own aim. Outside, the Han River carried Seoul's fractured reflection downstream in long ribbons of cold light. Somewhere across that water, a man was preparing to pour my name into concrete and bury it beneath the most significant project this city had commissioned in a generation. He had no idea what I had just set in motion. He had no idea that the blueprint he stole still carried my heartbeat inside it, patient and precise, and waiting for exactly the right moment to make itself known. In 14 days, I wasn't going to hand him a court summons. I was going to hand him a public reckoning, on the screens he had planned to celebrate on, in front of the people he had spent years performing for. In the city we had both given everything to except he had given what wasn't his, and I had simply been waiting until I was on the other side of the bridge before I struck the match. You think you know where this goes? You don't. Because the man who just signed that contract across from me? He smiled at my face and calculated with his eyes, and I let him, because that's what you do when you're the most dangerous person in the room and you need them to believe, just a little longer, that they're the one in control. Phase 3 is where the alliance gets close. Too close. And closeness, in my experience, is where the real architecture of betrayal begins to show its load-bearing walls.